All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to get some updates on this particular subject, so I'm excited that you're all here. My name is Cinnamon Moffett. I'm the Associate Director of Marine Research Support here at Hatfield, so thank you for being at our seminar. This is a hybrid event, so if you are new to these, we've got folks online and folks in the room. For folks online, if you have any questions or technical issues, please put those things into the chat. We have a volunteer in the room, Roseanne, who will navigate those with you or to ask those questions when we get to the question and answer section. For folks in the room, when you get to questions and answers, just raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic. You need a mic to be able to have the folks online hear and interact with us. So just letting you know that. And then as a reminder, when you leave, if you haven't already, go ahead and sign in on the sign-in sheet. That allows us to buy cookies and coffee that's out there for you. So. But again, thank you so much for being here. Wanted to do a couple of quick announcements and a quick plea. I'm still short a seminar speaker on February 12th. So if you or somebody you know might be willing to give a seminar, please let me know. Would love to get that session filled up. But what we have next week on February 5th is Sam Gurr, who is an assistant professor here with Coombs. For those of you that have been around Hatfield for a little while, he is kind of taking over where Chris Langdon left off. And so he will be doing a talk next week called Aquaculture in the Midst of Global Change. So come on down back to the same place, same time, and hear Sam and welcome him to the Hatfield community. That would be great. For everybody else, if you are interested in our talks, you're welcome to go to the Hatfield website, go to the events page. Everything that we do is there, and you can find out how to join us either in person or online. But the reason that we're here is to learn a little bit more from Ed. See, I'm going to mess it up now. Dever. All right, from Ed Dever. His name is not written the way it is pronounced, so I'm trying to learn. He has been an OSU faculty with the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences since 2005, and he is the principal investigator and project scientist for the NSF Ocean Observatory Initiative, Coastal Endurance Array, where he's been working to ensure that the array's science goals are met, and he helps oversees the operations. He is a physical oceanographer by training and is keenly interested in the eastern boundary coastal upwelling over seasonal and interannual timescales and ecosystem responses, including things like marine carbonate chemistry, micronutrients, dissolved oxygen, and phytoplankton productivity. And for many of us, we're curious about how OI is doing, and we're excited to get an update on all of that. So I'm going to hand this off to Ed. Go ahead. Welcome.
All right, thanks very much. Is the mic working? All right. So I'm Ed Dever. As Cinnamon said, I'm in CEOS over in the main campus in Corvallis, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to present here, and for your presence here in the room and online. Again, although my training's in physical oceanography, by virtue of my involvement with Ocean Observatories Initiative, I've really become interested in the effect of physical forcing and the biological ecosystem response. And although I'm the presenter of this talk, there's a lot of people behind it. And number one, the first person behind it is Chris Wingard. He's a faculty research assistant that's been working with the OI now since its inception, kind of 15 or so years ago when we were in construction. And he's really an amazing person, right? So Chris is, I just kind of ask him to take a look at something, and then he's off to the races. And as well as the figures, so much of the intellectual contributions of this talk really are his. I want to make sure that I give him the appropriate credit. I also want to thank the Ocean Observatories Initiative Endurance Array team, right? So, up until last summer, we had about a dozen folks that worked for the OI Endurance team. And, it's really a testament to their hard work over the last 10 years that we've been operational, that we've achieved such a good data quality, or good data return with high data quality. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about today, they're probably not too surprising to people in the room when you look at the broad brush. But my role in OI is to take a look at the data, to try to understand how that data can be used for research, And I haven't tried to pick all the flowers off of the data, right? One of the take-home points that I'd like to say is that that data is available. It's now been posted to Zenodo, a very nice quality controlled data set. We're going to continue to improve that data, continue to improve the data that's posted to Zenodo, and it should be like ready to roll for people to use in their research. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about first, I will give a little bit of an intro to the Ocean Observatories Initiative and an update based on the most recent kind of passage of part of the federal budget, and then I'll go into what motivates me, give you an overview of the measurements we have, the methods we've used, and then the kind of sciencey pieces of it are looking at the 2015 to 2025 seasonal cycles, comparing it to historical data, including data that a lot of folks here might have used or might be using from NOAA. Look at some events and interannual variability. And we've also done a lot of testing of alternative pH and PCO2 instruments as part of the Ocean Observatories Initiative. And although a lot of our staff now have moved on to other things, most of them are still within the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences or elsewhere at Oregon State University. Their expertise is still available to put things together, to put it in the water, to keep things going. And if you have an interest and a need to do that stuff, please feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in touch with them. Okay, so the Ocean Observatories Initiative, the big pieces of it are a couple of southern hemisphere arrays that existed from kind of 2015 through 2018 or 2020. Two global arrays, right? The global Erminger array just south of Greenland, and the Global Station Papa array in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska. Those arrays are still going, although they've been, the operations on them have kind of slowed and been suspended a little bit over the last year. On the East Coast, there's what was designed as a relocatable array. The Coastal Pioneer array was initially kind of put south of New England. I'm from New England, so I don't think of it as the New England Shelf Array, which they call it. I call it the New Jersey Array, because it's kind of south of New England, but east of New Jersey. That was in place from 2015 through 2022, and then it's moved down to what they're calling the Mid-Atlantic Bight Array since 2023, here off of Norfolk, Virginia, near Cape Hatteras as well. And then finally, the pieces on the west coast here, close to Oregon and Washington, are the Regional Cabled Array, which is primarily a geophysical array hooked into the coast, but includes water column instruments and the Coastal Endurance Array, where I work off of Oregon and Washington, and they're kind of shown right here. And this is the piece that we're going to be taking a look at right there. So now for the updates, right? And the updates are better than last week, but even as of January, we started to hear some good things, right? So in May of 2025, you may have seen, if you read updates and things from NSF, NSF, in response to the president's proposed budget, had a 55% cut, and they made some targeted cuts, including to OOI, which at the time they said was going to be suspended. And since then, they've allowed us to kind of continue some deployments across the different parts of OOI. And in early January, we received word that just from the continuing resolution, not the 2026 budget that was passed last week, but the continuing resolution, that they were going to add some more money back into OOI. So some infrastructure deployments that were paused on the arrays in summer of 2025 are being added back. That's especially true for the Pioneer Array, but also for the Cabled Array, and we're getting a little something back on the Endurance Array as well. But people at OOI, not everybody, but people especially that are involved in the data are still at work. There's still full access to the data through the OOI website, still up and running. NSF has told us to encourage data use, right? So, if you just search on the NSF Ultra Data Dear Colleague letter, it came out in 2024. It's still active, and what they, encourage the Ultra Data is to take long data sets like OOI, but it could also be things like NEON and other long data sets, and use those as part of a science proposal, right? And then OOI is still encouraging proposals for field work, added instruments, et cetera. Somebody recently got funded, a couple people recently got funded to do added field work associated with the Pioneer Array on the East Coast. The OOI help desk is open, and again, contact me or any of the other principal investigators for more information. In terms of what's happening off of Oregon, I'll introduce you to the Endurance Array in a couple slides, but what we call the Oregon Shelf Mooring in OOI speak, some of you might be familiar with as the NH10 mooring, right? There's a historical place on the Newport hydrographic line, 10 nautical miles off of where we stand or sit today, that there's been a mooring out there for very close to 30 years now, and we want to see that continue. So that has now been added back in. We're going to turn it in the spring of 2026 and in the fall of 2026, which means there's going to be reasonable observations there at least through the spring of 2027. We also have underwater gliders, where most of the gliders had been paused. We are going to be able to add in gliders back from February of this year to the end of 2026 at least. And that's all based on the continuing resolution. With the passage of the part of the FY 2026 bill last week, NSF is funded at something close to the 2024 level, and OOI, along with other parts of NSF, could see something close to full funding restored. It's not guaranteed, right? The NSF still has to allocate that money across their portfolio of research, so there's no guarantees that we would be added back to, but we have some hope, right? We have some hope. And along the same lines of being active, on the Endurance Array, we have what we call monthly office hours. If you go to the OOI website and Google it or whatnot, those office hours, the next office hours are next week, February 4th, 9 a.m. Pacific time, and you can speak to none other than Mr. Chris Wingard. And the purpose of those office hours is to help people access the data, and it's getting late for any proposals for the February 15th NSF deadline, but help people access the data for use in their research. And we have one that's basically the first Monday, sorry, it's the first Wednesday of the month, not the first Monday. I fixed the time today and I didn't fix it. It's the first Wednesday. I'll fix this up before I hand out slides to anybody that wants them. And then we're also working on producing community data sets for 2015 through 2025, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The bigger picture with OOI and other ocean observations is the National Science Foundation is taking seriously. There was a report done before the 2024 election by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, the NASEM report, the Decadal Ocean Survey. In that survey, they make a recommendation for ocean observations to be kind of revisited within the next year or so. And OOI is going to try to make that happen. I don't have a lot that I can say about it right now. I have rumors that that I know of, but I'm not going to spread them right now. But I think there will be opportunities to take part in envisioning the future of ocean observatory facilities within the next year from the National Science Foundation. Okay, so what do we mean by a community data set? So this can be something that's produced by different researchers or something that's produced internally within OOI. And so one of the things that we're trying to push right now are easy to use data sets that are basically out of the box ready, whether they've been made by outside investigators like this data set right here, which is marine carbonate system data in the Erminger Array. That's the array that's south of Greenland. And this was done by Meg Yoder et al. Last year, and published through JGR Oceans. But you can find these data through the OOI website, right? So this is different time series. The colors there correspond to different years, and I need my glasses to look at what we're looking at down here. So dissolved organic carbon, total alkalinity, PCO2, temperature, chlorophyll, and mixed layer depth. So that's a community data set that they use to do some research with, but that's available for anybody to take a look at as well now. and as part of what I'm going to be talking about today is a community data set that's produced within OOI that's now available to people, right? So my motivations are pretty simple. They're probably the same motivations that many of you have to understand things like ocean acidification and the marine carbonate system. You know, we want to understand the air-sea fluxes and carbon uptake by the ocean, especially the coastal ocean. Ocean acidification is a stressor on regional ecological communities. I think famously here, people know of it as a stressor on shellfish hatcheries, oyster hatcheries. What's shown on the right is a diagram from Simone Allen et al. Looking at the effect of ocean acidification as a stressor on Dungeness crab. This is from Oceanography magazine, really nice article. So that's a motivator as well for me and for people that have worked with me. But also, like I say, trying to build a community data set to assist you all in research, if you'd like. So these are the kind of measurements, or these are the locations that we make measurements associated with the marine carbonate system. pH and PCO2 are the measurements we make as part of OOI, right? So we've got two main lines from OOI. One of them here off of Central Washington. This is Grays Harbor, Washington, right here. We call this one the Grays Harbor line. These white dots right here are oceanographic moorings. The dashed lines are glider lines. And then we've got one line of moorings north of the Columbia River and one line of moorings which is partially obscured by my yellow lines that I've added here off of Newport. And at each one of these lines, we have a mooring that's really close to the coast, right? 25 meters of water off of Washington, just about 20 meters of water, or sorry, 29 meters of water off of Washington, about 25 meters of water off of Oregon. This was just about a mile off of Nye Beach. Maybe you've seen it if you went out offshore a couple times, different times in the years past. We've got, you know, the other mooring that's here, the Oregon Shelf mooring, at what people often refer to as NH10, about 10 nautical miles offshore, 80 meters water depth. And then here offshore is what we call the Oregon Offshore, 575 meters depth. And we have similar moorings, or had similar moorings off of Washington, like I say, 29 meters, 87 meters, and 542 meters. And the idea is we're getting something really close to the coastal boundary where waves and river input is important, kind of at the mid-shelf where wind forcing is the primary thing of importance, and then here at the continental slope where exchange with the deep sea becomes important. You start to lose the effect of the coastline in terms of forcing the polarization of flow in the along shelf direction. So the moorings have pH measurements at 7 meters. The larger moorings that I'm going to talk about in a minute have measurements up on the surface buoy. I'm not going to talk about this today, but those measurements are accompanied by a raft of physical, meteorological, dissolved oxygen, nitrate, biooptical measurements near the surface and near the bottom. And by having a long data record, we can start to get some insights into short-term synoptic variability, seasonal variability, impacts of heat waves, et cetera. So these are the moorings that we've deployed as part of OOI at those shelf and offshore locations. We've got some smaller moorings that we deployed at the inshore sites. And again, you may have seen these if you work at all offshore right here. On each of those moorings at the surface buoy, we have this Pro-Oceanus system that does air-sea PCO2. So a lot of people within NOAA, for example, work with the Battelle MAP PCO2 system. It's kind of their industry standard. We chose this one. I think it doesn't quite yet have the kind of credibility that the MAP PCO2 system does, but we found that it works pretty good, and I hope that we'll demonstrate that today. And so that, you know, that's one that's nice and clean and all copper taped up, and that's kind of what they look like after about 6 months in the water. Okay, and we make PCO2 and pH water measurements as well. Most of our buoys just have the pH at 7 meters. The inshore moorings, we've got pH and PCO2 at 7 meters, so it's co-located. One question, right? We've got the air-sea PCO2 here, we've got the pH there. we do have a shallow surface boundary layer sometimes. Are they really seeing the same water? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but we think it's a problem that one can work around. And again, our measurement system here, it is one of the ones that's kind of used oftentimes as kind of the industry standard, the sunburst SAMI pH and the sunburst SAMI PCO2. And one of the things that OOI did is, we bought all our sensors about 15 years ago. I gave a version of this talk about 6 months ago at University of South Florida, and a young graduate student asked me, she goes, why are you measuring pH and PCO2? Wouldn't it be better to measure total alkalinity and PCO2? And the answer is yes. The answer is also we bought these things 15 years ago when they were basically the only game on the block. And we are trying to update things. We're trying to do testing on new sensors. One of the new sensors that we implemented partially across OOI is the Seabird Seafox V2, and we've done that about half of our mooring locations now have that sensor on them. In terms of data quality assurance and quality control, and quality assurance is the stuff you do before you put it in the water, so hopefully it's working well. Quality control is what you do afterwards when you're looking at the data as it comes out of the sea, right? We do calibration by manufacturers, so all of our instruments after every deployment, we send them back to Seabird or Sunburst or whoever, Andaref or an Optode. We have 2 sets of instruments with overlapping deployments where possible, so we put the new mooring in next to the old mooring, have it there for a day or so, and then pull the old one out. We use common biofouling mitigation strategies, right? So the copper tape you saw in some of those pictures, we've got the anti-fouling paint here. We use UV anti-fouling mitigation, UV lights for anti-fouling mitigation on some sensors. And other sensors, we use the old kind of trick of putting some Desitin on them to kind of discourage growth of things as well. We try to meet with the instrument manufacturers every year. We're doing meetings right now to review the quality of things, updates to the instruments, et cetera. And then we do human-in-the-loop processing with annotations of issues for quality control, and we have some real-time automated QC we're doing as well. And Chris Wingard, who I mentioned earlier, he's the person that does a lot of that stuff, and the person that's at the end of the help desk if you ask for help about these things. So for the endurance array, what we found is that the AirSea PCO2 was one of the most reliable things. It compares well to big databases of carbonate system measurements like SOCAT. It also compares well to underway ship measurements. We've taken bottle PCO2 and bottle dissolved inorganic carbon, and those samples are run by Burke Hale's lab over on the main campus at CEOS, from which we can derive other carbonate system parameters, including total alkalinity. The bottle samples, of course, they're limited in number and time. They're not always close enough to the moorings. There are sometimes occasional sampling issues, et cetera. But we do have, I think, I was talking to Chris this morning, he said we've got about 1,200 bottle samples now just as part of OOI. And we do need to get those onto some of the common databases like Bicodemo for use for folks. But they are all available through the OOI as well. The things that Chris really added are, he talked to Sunburst, right? So he reprocessed the SAMI data to fill in missing or bad blanks or interpolate between bad blanks, looked at internal processing steps and implemented different QC checks beyond just the final number that comes out. We've used, again, the surface bottle samples to look at some total alkalinity estimates based on things we've measured, like temperature, salinity, and dissolved oxygen. And we've used the total alkalinity plus PCO2 to help control the pH measurements, and we're building these data sets. And like I said, one of them is out now on Zenodo, which is a publicly available data set and Zenodo is a website for the storage of data sets like this. So a couple questions you might ask are, how sensitive are the results to the choice of the total alkalinity estimate? How big an issue is it to have your pH at the surface versus 7 meters? Does it matter what kind of sensors you use? And so one of the things that Chris did was we looked at a couple different estimates of total alkalinity, right? So this is an old one from 2006. A lot of this stuff was kind of inspired by work that Dick Feely had done on the US West Coast, right? But this is Lee et al. 2006. What's shown here is these are the estimates from of total alkalinity at the mooring sites. These are from discrete samples right here. So this is mooring temperature and salinity using the Lee et al. Thing to produce total alkalinity there. And you can see this is the one-to-one line, that dashed line. So you can see it's off a little bit. But then two more modern estimates right here. This is Andrea Fassbender et al. At NOAA, her estimate off of basically an estimate that's tuned for the Washington Shelf, kind of the Olympic Coast Peninsula and around the strait of Juan de Fuca. This is from a global estimate, an AI-based estimate called Canyon B by Bittig et al. In 2018. And if there's one other take-home point I could make, this Canyon B estimate seems to work pretty darn well. It may not work very well in small bays and estuaries if you're concerned about alkalinity estimates for oyster farming, for example, but off the coast here, it works pretty well. And that estimate, we can even improve on this because this estimate was based on temperature, salinity, location, and then we used a climatological estimate of dissolved oxygen. If we use our actual estimates of dissolved oxygen, indications are this thing improves even a little bit more. So we think we're honing in on useful total alkalinity estimates here. And so this is just an example. What's shown here is temperature, salinity, and it's for the Oregon offshore site, which is right there. And what's shown, there's temperature, salinity, and then there's two different estimates of total alkalinity, the Canyon B one and the Fassbender. The Canyon B is a little bit thinner line, the Fassbender one is a thicker line, so they're pretty close. And the different colors here on the mooring line time series are just different deployments. Like this is where one deployment ends, another one begins right there, right? So it all kind of hooks up together. We've also tested different instruments, right? So we've tested, this is our standard sensor at the surface, the Pro-Oceanus Air-Sea PCO2 sensor. That's shown in blue, the buoy sensor. And then we did a test with a 7-meter Pro-Oceanus PCO2 sensor called the Pro-CV. And you can see here, generally in this test deployment, they line up pretty well. Where they don't line up, it's because the salinity is different, right? We're seeing different water masses. We think that's a real difference rather than just a large sensor offset. We've also done testing with this CFOX V2, and so what's shown here is the CFOX temperature, the CFOX salinity together with our CTD, and then what's shown here, this is the CFOX dissolved oxygen together with one of our other independent dissolved oxygen measurements. So they can see a small change in the dissolved oxygen measurement right there. But again, working pretty good. So the CFOX seems to be a pretty good instrument. In doing these quality control assessments, Chris has primarily used something called PyCO2sys, so a Python program that was based on MATLAB PCO2, the MATLAB CO2sys was adapted into Python, and then that's based on probably earlier Fortran code, and even other people have done similar things using coefficients derived primarily kind of in the 1990s to estimate the carbonate system from a couple different parameters. So PyCO2sys is a pretty nice toolbox, and the post-process data that we've done has all been processed using PyCO2sys. The processing programs as well as the data sets are available again through Zenodo. So what's shown here is this is again the Oregon offshore site. The PCO2 measurements at the surface for different, with different deployments shown in different colors. There's little black dots in here. Those are those are the bottle samples that are at that mooring. So there's the PCO2 temperature, salinity, and then this is the estimate of alkalinity. Again, this is from the Canyon B. So you can see there's occasional outliers right here in the bottle samples that we discarded. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to compare to work done by Andrea Fassbender et al. In 2018. And she was mainly looking at, or they were mainly looking at things off of Washington right here. So they've got this giant area here called NP, the North Pacific, where they derived carbonate system variables. They've got this area here, OC, the outer coast, where they derived carbonate system variables. They had a time series at the Cape Elizabeth mooring right here. And then our measurements here are at the Washington Shelf, Washington offshore, and the Oregon Shelf, Oregon offshore. And the Washington measurements we can kind of compare to their outer coast as well as the Cape Elizabeth buoy. The Oregon measurements we can only compare to their North Pacific stuff because they don't have anything that's too much further south than Washington. So they did stuff earlier than we did. Everything is kind of pushed to the same time using the trends that they found. They pushed everything to 2010. That's kind of what we did here. So to me, there's some pretty cool stuff here. This is where the fun stuff to me starts. What's shown here, this is the fugacity of CO2 rather than PCO2. For all intents and purposes, it's PCO2, I think, adjusted for not really being an ideal gas. It's something like a 2% adjustment. And we just adjusted it to fugacity to be consistent with what Fassbender et al. did. Top left here is the Washington offshore. Top right is Washington Shelf. Bottom left is Oregon offshore. Bottom right is Oregon Shelf. What's shown here, this is the seasonal cycle right here. So that's January, that's December. There's the FCO2 right there. And the OI measurements are in orange, right, because we're the beeves. And we did a biharmonic fit to our data. The gray dots there are the individual years, right? The averages over a month for individual years between 2015 and 2025. And then up here on the top in the blue is that outer coast measurement right there that Fassbender et al. Did. The black line is the averages from the Cape Elizabeth buoy. And then down here, we've just got the North Pacific is the blue line, again, from bottle data, extending all the way back to the 1970s, but kind of progressed with the trend line to 2010. So what you can see here is in the summer, as primary production increases in general, right, we get lower PCO2, lower FCO2, and the system is in general sort of a sink for atmospheric carbon dioxide, right? This is the basically in the winter time right here. This is the atmospheric PCO2. Remember, this is adjusted for 2010, so it's slightly below 400. Now we're up here, right? So that's the seasonal cycle off of Washington. And if you start to look at these different sites closely enough, you can start to see some kind of interesting differences, right? So off of Washington on the shelf, you get lower PCO2 in the summertime because there's higher primary productivity there, drawdown of things. You can also see that you can see an initial dip right here off of Oregon that precedes the dip off the Washington Shelf site. You can see that off of at the offshore sites, the dip happens a little bit later than it does at the shelf sites. And then there's also this kind of thing that happens here in July and August off of Oregon, where actually the PCO2 can be kind of high. And if you look at the individual years, these are averaged over an entire month. Sometimes the PCO2 can be significantly higher than atmospheric PCO2. And this is not a phenomenon that we discovered, right? And I'll mention that in a minute. And if you look at the pH, it's they kind of go in opposition to one another. They're opposite trending things, right? So lowest PCO2 corresponds with the highest pH and vice versa. So you can see this initial increase here in the early spring in pH off the Oregon Shelf, followed by a decrease. And then in some individual months, quite low average pH. So as I said, this is something that Wiley Evans, who was a student of Burke Hales, noticed and published as part of his PhD thesis work now about 15 years ago. And what he's showing here is these are time series measurements from that Oregon Shelf NH10 site. And you can see here that in some years, in 2008 in particular, they had a time series where the PCO2 was up to 1,100, right, microatmospheres. So way above atmospheric. And other years it wasn't as high, and then in the winter it was very close to atmospheric. So here's this dashed line here is the estimate of atmospheric PCO2 at the times those studies were done, kind of in the early 2000s. So there are these very high spikes, and what he noticed was those spikes happened during upwelling events, right? So this is the wind right here. When the wind blows to the south, right, the Ekman transport's offshore, you're driving that surface water offshore, you're bringing the cold, nutrient-rich, oxygen-poor, and also high PCO2 water to the surface. This is their PCO2 record during that time, and you can see here associated with low SST, high salinity, there's high PCO2 that's reaching up to and above 1,000 microatmospheres during some of these extended, long periods of upwelling favorable winds. And when I went to go look at the OI data, I wanted to see if the same thing happened. And interestingly enough, it didn't in many years. So 2015 was a year with comparable strength upwelling to 2008. So this is the wind. I didn't do the vector arrows. I just did the along shelf wind right here. This is the zero line, that little dash line. Whenever it's down here, that's a equatorward wind, right, to the south, using the oceanographer convention, a northerly wind using the meteorologist convention. That's pushing water offshore. And you do see some decreases in temperature and increases in salinity, but you don't see the giant spikes that Evans et al. Saw back in 2008. We're not getting up to 1,000. And in fact, none of the years in OI until 2021 did we see atmospheric spikes above 1,000 microatmospheres. So this is 2021, again, a very strong upwelling year. And during some of these strong upwelling events, you can now see the temperature gets a little bit lower, salinity gets a little bit higher, and the PCO2 gets up to about 1,000. We're still not getting to what Evans et al. Saw way back in 2008. And these are, for what it's worth, this is a nice demonstration of the power of long time series. So this is from, these are cumulative wind stresses from the NDBC buoy 46050, which is colloquially known here as the Stonewall Bank buoy, right? And they're time series that date all the way back to 1985. So the recently retired Steve Pierce, who worked with Jack Barth, what they did is they looked at cumulative upwelling wind stress. So more negative means stronger upwelling. There's 2008 in this blue line right here. There's 2015 right here, and there's 2021. So 2008 was much stronger than average. 2015 and 2021 were even stronger than 2008, but yet we still didn't see that strong response in high PCO2. And kind of a difficult figure to look at. But what's shown here, the blue to orange is the atmospheric level, or the PCO2 in microatmospheres, with it going up to about 950 right there, down around 150 right there. There's the sea surface salinity, sea surface temperature right here. So this is low temperature, high salinity water right there. And the part that's kind of difficult to see, those X's with this kind of orangey color to them, those only occur in 2021. So although we had strong upwelling winds in both 2015 and 2021, we had lower PCO2 variability in 2015. And I think that might be due to lingering effects from the 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave, also known as the warm blob, right? So just to kind of summarize, in terms of our methodology, right, we've got time series from 2015 to 2025. While we got some gaps, the seasonal cycles really compare well to the published data. That PyCO2sys is a very useful tool. I don't know whether you use it yourselves, but very useful to help us perform quality assessment, as well as calculate marine carbonate system parameters, including omega, either aragonite saturation or calcite saturation, which is very useful for understanding ecosystem response or affecting ecosystem response. We've posted a quality controlled data set on Zenodo. If you just search on NSF OOI Zenodo, it'll take you there to that OOI Zenodo site, and you can find these data very easily. We've still got a lot more work to do. So we're going to look at, we've done the near surface marine carbonate time series. We're going to try to move in towards the inshore sites and the bottom sites. We've got bottom time series that exist, but they have more problems due to sediment resuspension, clogged pumps and instruments, et cetera. And this really quickly is that, if you go to that NSF Zenodo site, the same name as this seminar, 10 years of quality controlled carbonate system measurements from the NSF OOI Endurance Array are available on that site. There's a little story about it, and then you can get the data, and if you scroll down further, this is just a screenshot, right? You can get to GitHub and get the code that was used to produce the data here. And this is all work that Chris Wingard did. So all credit to him for that. And today, Chris is like, oh, I got this new plot, and you want to put this in your seminar? I'm like, sure. It's pretty cool stuff, right? So this is now, he's starting to look at the bottom data. And it's fair to say this is the best bottom data that we got from OOI, right? A lot of people, it's like, okay, you get the surface data, that's nice. But what we really want is the bottom data, because that's going to affect benthic organisms. And we don't have as much of that. That's much harder to get to. So these are some nice bottom time series right here. They're at this Washington shelf site. So we have measurements right at the bottom. This is bottom temperature, bottom salinity, bottom oxygen, and then bottom pH. And what's shown here, you can see there's a couple places there where the plot just has a gap kind of filled in with a straight line, but generally a pretty good time series. The orange things here, those are the bottle sample records. So this is a CTD lowered right next to the mooring where we caught a little bit of water, and Bert Hale's lab ran it. So there's the temperatures, the salinities, dissolved oxygen, right? So these are our own dissolved oxygen sensors doing a pretty good comparison. The gray here is the bottom SAMI pH, and then the blue is an estimate of pH from the Canyon B model using temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, location, and water depth. And it lines up pretty darn well, right? So these right here are clearly problems with the SAMI pH sensor, but where the SAMI pH sensor seems to be working, it lines up pretty well with the Canyon B estimate. So that's what we're using, or Chris, I should say more properly, is using to start to estimate some of the marine carbonate system time series near the bottom. So in terms of the results, right, we've got geographic variability in the timing and magnitude of the seasonal cycle. The shelf seasonal minima in PCO2 or FCO2, which correspond to maxima in pH, they precede the offshore, and Oregon precedes Washington. Monthly averages have significant year-to-year variability, especially over the Oregon shelf, sorry. Upwelling drives the PCO2 variability, leads to peaks in PCO2, but underlying changes in the upwelling source water also affect the carbonate system. So that highest PCO2 occurs when strong upwelling is accompanied by relatively cool, salty source water. So that's what I got. I got some awesome backup slides, but I'm right at 414 right here. So I want to stop and ask questions. The backup slides, for what it's worth, they pertain mainly to some of the instrument testing that we've been doing. So if you're like a real guru about instruments and you want to hear what our happy and sad stories are, then that's what the backup slides are. So like I say, I'll pause there, and happy to take questions at this point. Thank you.
I have so many questions, but I'm going to open it up to folks, and we're going to start with anything online. Roseanne, any questions online? Okay, so folks online, go ahead and put any questions into the chat. How about questions in the room? There we go.
Hi, Ed. Thanks for your presentation. Maybe you said it and I missed it, but I was curious if you ever nailed down the discrepancy between the 2008 data and what OOI collected.
Yeah, so I think both the I think the data are good in both cases, right? So what Wiley Evans was doing was some of the very first deployments of the Sunburst SAMI PCO2, and at the same time they had a lot of bottle samples, and they also had shipboard sample or ship underway flow-through system samples. So I think those samples are pretty good. I think ours are also pretty solid. The big difference we saw between 2008 and our long run of data are that we didn't see water that was quite as cold or quite as salty upwelled. We had the same winds, but we had warmer source water. And so upwelling is typically going to draw source water from, 150 or so, maybe a little bit deeper meters up to the surface. And I think part of what we're seeing is natural variability, and part of what we're seeing is human-induced variability in that source water. So like I said, the OOI data began in 2015 almost concurrently with an almost continuous series of marine heat waves of varying size, right? So like I said, the blob is a pretty well-known one. We saw the last remnants of the blob probably in 2016. We saw another smaller heat wave in 2019. We've even seen like a little bit of a heat wave in 2023. So I think what we're seeing is some of these changes in the upwelled source water have some interesting effects, right? So one thing they do is, the nutrients that we're seeing probably aren't quite as high, but the oxygen might be a little bit higher, the PCO2 might be a little bit lower. To me, I think that's a really interesting research question, is as we kind of go forward into a changing climate, what are the follow-on ecosystem effects if we're changing the levels of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nutrients that are being upwelled? Are they gonna lead to eastern boundary current systems, which are a sink for atmospheric PCO2? Is that sink gonna increase? Is that sink gonna decrease? I think the data are real in each case. I think we're seeing kind of different phenomena. Does that help answer the question? Thank you.
Other questions in the room? Roseanne, any other questions online? All right, everybody, you're handing the mic to me. That's trouble. So can you go back, Ed, to the slide where you're comparing Washington and Oregon? I'm just curious about more of the long-term trend and not the average comparison. And maybe you can talk to it without the slide.
Oh, well, I think I can. I think is this what?
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking about. Okay. Just, right, we're looking at an average over time.
Yeah, what we're looking at here is these are month-by-month averages at 4 different sites. And you said you're interested in Oregon versus Washington? I was just curious.
Well, this slide, in thinking about changes over time, if these are the averages over that time chunk, are we seeing a huge shift from like year to year that you can talk about?
So there are definitely, so if you look here, like each one of those gray dots represents a different year.
Right, but
and I don't have which year
they
are listed on there. But I would bet dollars to donuts, for example, this one up here where we saw really high, this is a monthly average of PCO2 above 450. That was almost certainly 2021, for example. And some of these other years where we had relatively low PCO2, that was probably 2015, 2016. So what we're seeing here, the year-to-year variability, it's kind of it's a mixture of different effects. Some years, if we have relatively weak upwelling, we're going to see relatively warm, relatively fresh water at the surface with initially low PCO2. That water is probably going to drive less productivity because it has less nutrients associated with it, but it's not going to have those huge spikes in PCO2. Other years, we might get a similar looking effect where if we see, for example, even if we had strong upwelling like in 2015, if we're upwelling relatively warm water, relatively warm, low salinity water that's low in nutrients, it's also going to be low in PCO2. So we can get the same net effect from a couple different things. Both of these data sets, the Fassbender et al. Data set and the one that we have, they're detrended. So they're all adjusted to 2015. They don't include that 1.5 microatmosphere per year upward trend in the average ocean PCO2. To me, one of the most interesting things, though, is this difference between the Washington Shelf and the Oregon Shelf. And I think this is a relatively robust trend. The Oregon Shelf, I think we see stronger upwelling events that can just overwhelm the ability of the local marine ecosystem to take up that PCO2, right? And Wiley Evans actually has a paper back in 2015, and I think he titled the paper something like "Failure to Bloom," right? And he went back and he analyzed his 2008 data set, and he said basically what's happening during that year, 2008, is that cold water was upwelling like crazy, faster than marine organisms could photosynthesize and draw down that PCO2. And to me, the interesting story in this that I think that bears taking a look at is there's this trend from Oregon to Washington because we see stronger upwelling in general off of Oregon than we do off of Washington. Well, this is central Oregon. As we go further to the south, to southern Oregon and to northern California, upwelling is even stronger there. And so, Burke Hales has now been taking surface PCO2 measurements off of Coos Bay for several years now using the MAP PCO2 system. So that would be interesting to see what the comparison is now down south to Coos Bay. But once you get south of Burke's measurements off of Coos Bay, there's a lot of measurements missing down, further south off of Oregon and into Northern California. And those areas, to me, I think would be dynamite to take a look at because to see what levels of PCO2 we're seeing there during active upwelling events and to try to understand how all this is going to change as we change the source water that we're upwelling and the wind strength, right, as a function of latitude, if we see long-term changes in the wind forcing. I think there's some really interesting questions out there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Any other questions in the room? Any questions online, Roseanne? Do you want to show us a couple of your extra slides?
Sure. We'll take a look at
just a few minutes. I want to see some of the comparison.
Yeah, we'll take a look at a couple of the backup slides. So, I mentioned, in order to get carbonate system measurements, you got to have, the measurements have to work, right? So biofouling is one problem, but clogging of sensors is another, especially near the bottom. So if we're really interested in benthic measurements, we got to try to understand better how to make measurements near the bottom that are, relatively speaking, less affected by sediment transport, et cetera. So we've been talking with this company, A&B. They make a pH sensor for ocean and coastal monitoring. It's an unpumped sensor. It's less affected by sediment clogging. We've tried it a couple different times, right? There it is right there. We've had a bunch of issues in tests. The vendor has actually been really responsive, right? So Chris has emailed them. They've made updates on firmware. They've made updates on hardware. We've done a couple deployments. It hadn't been effective for us. Recently, I mean, like within the last month, Chris got a message. We kind of let people know we're having trouble with this thing. And we got a message from his counterpart. Her name's Sarah Zhang. She's up at Ocean Networks Canada. She said the most recent A&B firmware update seems to be working for Ocean Networks Canada deployments. And so since we're going to get to go back in the water this spring, at least at the Oregon Shelf site, we're thinking we want to push this into and do another test and see if we can finally get it right? Persistence is really important here. The other thing that we've tried using is seabird sensors, right, the tributyl tin caps are rapidly becoming difficult to use and acquire due to issues with, well, the fact that they're poison. And the RBR Concerto CTD, it's got a couple of nice things to it. It has an open flow cell that we deployed this off of Washington, the Washington inshore site, which has a ton of sediment transport. It's a terrible site to try to work at. But people love it, right? The Quinault Indian Nations up there, they like it. The Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuaries up there, they like these data. The open flow cell did eliminate sediment clogging, at least over the summertime. In the wintertime, sometimes the whole sensor gets buried. There's no getting around that. But in the summertime in 2025, the open flow cell eliminated the sediment clogging. The UV lamps that they provided did effectively control the biofouling, but they had a high power draw. And so I think this is actually an issue with their programming of the UV lamps. We're using elsewhere in OI these AML UV lamps, and the duty cycle, we have on a lower duty cycle that's still effective. When Chris corresponded with RBR about this, they were, I think they like their programming the way it is. Like they can't adjust it, but I think there might be something that we can maybe talk to them and get something that can also be effective but has a lower power draw. Not changing the UV biofouling technology at all, but just changing its duty cycle a little bit. So we're still working and thinking about these things. Again, we did this testing with this Pro Oceanus in-water PCO2 sensor. The nice thing about it is we thought it might be a potential duplicate or alternate with the Sunburst SAMI system. It's reagent-free, it's more compact, there's no requirement for pumping, it minimizes some clogging issues. So we've only bought one example of those. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, there are now commercially available total alkalinity sensors from several vendors. And so I don't know very much about PCO2 and pH in the marine carbonate system, right? My training's in physical oceanography. But the way that I think of it is pH and PCO2 are so closely aligned, they're not orthogonal to one another. So if you measure them really well, you can use those pH and PCO2 to get all the parameters of the marine carbonate system. But if one of them is noisy, it's going to introduce a lot of noise into your estimate of other parameters. Where if you think of like PCO2 and total alkalinity, they're a little bit more, orthogonal is probably not the right word, but they're a little bit more independent. And if you can measure total alkalinity and PCO2, the other parameters in the marine carbonate system are not going to be so dependent on errors in either one of those, right? So that's something else we could consider. So that's kind of where we're at. And then, as far as the CFOX goes, we've had pretty good success with it. The CFOX is prone to offsets, and we're learning how to correct for those offsets, control those offsets when we put this thing in the water. So you can see here, the SAMI pH actually did great. The PCO2 plus total alkalinity did great, and for this one deployment, we had a little bit of an offset. But the variability lined up really well. So we think we can correct for that offset by doing some immediate testing right before we put the thing in the water, as well as more bottle testing if needed. And they don't always, this is the worst offset we've seen. But in general, it's a good sensor. We like the fact that it gives you temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and pH all together, so that makes it kind of nice. So that's, so like I say, we're working with Seabird. In fact, I think they had a call with Seabird today to talk about, documentation, configuration, care and handling as well for that sensor. So that's like I said, a couple updates on and like I said, on biofouling, and it is just a bear to deal with, right? So that's only after a few. I think that was after a relatively short deployment. You can see things growing all over the place in some cases, right? If you've got, this is the UV anti-fouling mitigation, does a great job. That's on a spectral irradiance sensor, so 7 channels of of light near this. This was deployed 7 meters beneath the surface off of Oregon. So anyway, thanks again for your time. Very happy to answer questions. Again, next Wednesday at 9 a.m. there's that OOI office hours. Happy to guide people to this Zenodo data set. Again, you can find my email at Oregon State. It's edward.dever@oregonstate.edu, and very happy to, like I say, answer any questions you may have about OOI, whether it's about the data, OOI's future, or whatnot.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And we're all very excited about the new news and maybe the new future for OOI. So thank you very much. All right, everybody, thanks for being here. Hope to see you next week. And remember, I need somebody for February 12th. If anybody has suggestions for me, I'm open. Okay, thanks, everyone.